about the underground, whether it's aliyah, bricha, every man had his little part. This was my part in this movement. Other movements, we had other parts. But no one, chaplain or otherwise, started, let's say, from Kovna or from some other place and suddenly became involved in the program all the way up to Marseille or some other place and so forth.
So that was your involvement in Brecha?
No, I had many involvements. I had an involvement, for example, with the Irgun in Teddy Colic.
All right, well, that's a later period.
Yes, when
let's
fine.
get back to the earlier period so I can keep it in certain...
yes, fine.
I hope you don't mind. It's just
No,
so much to tell that it'll be easier for me.
Let me give you another little piece.
Okay.
The brigade,
Okay.
Palestine Brigade. Now, the brigade, you know, wanted originally to come into Germany, but the British wouldn't allow them. And so they gave them a base, I think, in Belgium someplace, and also in Italy. Yes. And so to provide for their installations, they would move from Italy to their positions in Belgium, and so they would cross Germany. And while they crossed up and back, they became part of our work. Not a great part of our work, but part of our work. First of all, symbolically, it was a great thing for the Jews and for the whole later movement. Here, after all, was the first they saw, after all, the uniform and the symbol. And in these movements, there were certain people who became effective in terms of our work and also participated in our decisions. And there were certain people like Ben Asher, Chater Yishai, these are different people, and there were others that...
Ben Natan.
Huh?
You mean Asher Ben Natan?
I really can't give you their full names in the sense that my familiarity with their full names is not such, and again, I have kept no records of this, but Chater Yishai and Ben Asher, and then there were one or two others that were key people. And of course, they'd always stop in Munich, and they'd stop and meet with me. And we then would discuss certain problems, and we would make decisions. For example, we had our first conference of the Central Committee in St. Etienne, in the hospital. Yes. Now, before the conference was established in St. Etienne, there was a debate as to where it would take place. And the debate was between Chater Yishai and I think Ben Asher. That isn't important, except that the question was whether it should be held in Munich proper or in St. Etienne. Now, what was the factor involved here? The factor was that if it were held in Munich, it would cause a storm. It would be a time to dramatize the problems, because, again, we were in the early period, the very early period, and this was a time when we were trying to make known the conditions of the people. And we
when was this meeting exactly?
Yes, we'd have to check out, but it was very early. The first conference, we had 3 conferences. We had the one in St. Etienne the first, and then we had one in the Munich Rathaus, and I have a film on that, with Ben Gurion speaking and so forth. And
you have a film?
Yes, I have a film. You can see it, and so forth. You can see the people and all that. It was at the Rathaus. I mean, I was in the film business too. And the third one was down south. I remember the town. All these names have to be refreshed. Anyway, this was a debate. Now, the debate finally came down as to me. Now, the understanding was that I would go along with the decision, except that if it were held in Munich, chances are that that would be the end of my work. This would cause quite a flare-up. Everything would be illegal about it. Curfew was on. People congregating was on. There was law against that. In other words, this would be a thrust at the whole existing military structure and so forth. And the result would be is that we would make the grandstand play. And perhaps it would do a lot of good, but the result would be I'd be through, because the army would certainly not tolerate it. Well, this was an assumption. And Ben Asher was for Munich, and my having to go if necessary. Fateh Yishai was against it. And of course, they had their debates and arguments, and finally a resolution came, and it was held in St. Attila. This was the kind of a relationship we established with the brigade. So this again was something we worked with. Now, I'm sure the brigade has its story as to other things that it did in terms of whether or not it brought ammunition down and you know what guns or so forth. It may have transferred and so forth.
Now, is that part of the same story?
No, this was not my department.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
You had nothing to do with sending guns?
No.
Do you know anybody who did?
Yes, the collecting point was the Streicher farm out in Nuremberg. This is where it was happening, and we were using butter and milk. You see, we had the farm, the Streicher farm, and butter and milk was being made and sold, and guns were being purchased and channeled through the farm and sent. But this was not my.
Who were the chaplains involved in that?
No chaplains were involved in it, not to my knowledge.
Now, I was told, and I don't recall at this moment which chaplain told me about this.
Well, if he was involved, then
No,
he'd
but
have
he
to-
said that, well, Rabbi Lev also mentioned to me that there were chaplains involved in this. He wouldn't tell me which ones, but he said,
I
you don't know.
first of all, the amount of guns that at this point that you could come upon.
Well, wait, we're talking in terms of early...
In the early period, there were no chaplains there, had anything to do with it. Out of the question.
Well, GIs would come to chaplains and say, here are guns.
No, absolutely not. This is
Myth?
myth. First of all, the chaplain wouldn't know what to do with it. Where he was going to put it. There was nobody to give it to.
Well, they served as...
To whom, where, what? Nah, nonsense. In other words, let's say that after all, the chaplains were there for a week or two or three or four, that's all, and they were gone. They'd shoot through and they'd come through and end up someplace. They were always on the move, and there was nobody to take the gun from them. There was no whole Zionist cause at that time. Our first battle with Zionism came after the Freising issue, where the camp was broken down, and we set up offices in the Deutsche Museum, and one of the men, a fellow named Ratner, who's now in South Africa, said one of the offices, I was creating 4 rooms, should be the Zionist office, and I was against it, and we had a big fight over it.
What was the whole thrust of that?
Because I figured we should make the distinction. You know, the fact is we're all Jews and we all want the same thing. Everybody was talking about going to Israel or getting out of here, and suddenly we're going to start breaking this up. In other words, we Jews this and you Jews that. For me, it was one big total experience in which we were all involved. And the fact that you're now going to set up a separate office and so forth, this was something that I couldn't understand. Of course, what happened later was that not only was the office set up, but the whole political structure of the Zionist parties was also imposed upon with the shlichim. They came as supposedly as people who were going to help, which they did, but they carried 2 portfolios. And other newspapers had to be established, and whenever we had a meeting, you would hear voices from different corners, and you got caught up in the whole pattern of party politics. But at that point, I didn't see it and didn't want it. But there were no chaplains on the ground. In other words, if you take all of the area, all of Bavaria, Upper and Lower Bavaria, we had no one. I was the chaplain there, that's all. Lippmann came, and Lippmann certainly didn't have anything to do with guns, and Lippmann was sent over to Czechoslovakia. He moved about.
He did tell me of one howitzer that had been requested.
Yes, but again, I picked up a gun here and there, but when you talk about collecting guns, you're not, and then who do you give it to and so forth. Later on, you pick up a gun and give it to somebody, and some of the brigade boys pick them up and take them. Fine, we didn't have...
But there was no organized...
No. There was an organized, yes, but it didn't have anything to do with chaplains. In fact, at the beginning, let's say, had I been asked or been aware or thought in those terms, everything was open to me. We're talking now, when you're on the scene in May and June and July, where everything's being gathered up and stockpiled and so forth, where tons and tons of material, we needed a vehicle, you go to the dumping ground for vehicles. You find the best one you can, or you take a couple of them and you make one out of it and so forth. We could have gotten all the ammunition needed, but at that point we were not thinking in those terms. So until the Streicher farm was established, they started to funnel guns through there. We didn't have an organized program, except that the brigade boys were.
Now, when this Streicher farm,
Mhm.
You were involved in that in any way?
It was part of my area. In other words, I was.
But you had nothing to do with this aspect of the gun.
No.
Was there anything else about the brigade and your involvement with them and their involvement with you that you wanted to discuss?
No. Our involvement.
Just excuse me 1 second.
Yeah.
The period that we're talking about, the brigade is.
We'd have to establish the date of the meeting in Saint Etienne. I'd have to check back on that, but that was. My guess would be that would be in the early fall of 45. Now, what happened was that there were certain brigade men remained in Germany, and we took care of them, housed them, so forth, covered.
Mm-hmm. Anything more on that?
They, in turn, then went about their work, and then we assisted them.
Well, that's important.
Yes. Whatever they wanted. All their cover and
remember
everything.
in particular how this worked out?
No, they come and make their request. I can't even remember their names.
Now, without your being a chaplain, this probably wouldn't have been possible.
Maybe they'd find some other way. This made it easy, very easy.
Mm-hmm.
At Free Zieberstrasse, we had them living in the building and so forth, or at St. Etienne, you can go any place.
Mm-hmm.
We could house them, keep them, so forth.
What about the story of the hospitals? Do you think that that's worth telling in detail?
Well, I don't know, again, what's worth how. Let's take St. Etienne as a hospital. Now, St. Etienne is a monastery, Catholic monastery. During the war, the Nazis used it as a hospital for a Wehrmacht hospital. In other words, they took a big section of it, and it's a typical European monastery, farms and a printing shop. They had all kinds of shops going and so forth. The printing shop actually was turned into a military printing shop there. And here you had a hospital. Now, just before the war ended, a train was carrying some of the DPs back behind the lines. And when you hear the stories of these last days, they're usually one follows the other. The Germans didn't know really what was happening. They'd run away, and then they'd come back. And so this train was being moved up and back and so forth.
Who was in charge of the train?
The Germans, yes. And eventually the American forces came in and shooting against the Germans, and the train was caught in the middle, and a number of people were injured. On this train was Zalman Grinberg, a doctor. And so here, when they got out of the train, took the wounded, the question is, what do you do with them? And so word was funneled down or around and so forth to one of the army officers and so forth that there was a hospital nearby, which happened to be St. Etienne. And this officer saw to it that these people were taken with Zalman Greenberg to the hospital, and they took a number of beds there and put them down and left. Except that this officer was taken by the situation, not a Jew, and he kind of stayed with the situation to make sure that things would go well and so forth. And so here we have the beginning of a hospital. When I came into the picture and discovered St. Etienne,
which was when?
Early 45, shortly right after this, actually, I discovered it. And came there and found Greenberg and found these people and so forth and saw what was going on here.
Would this be about May or June?
It'd have to be June, not May.
Okay.
June or July. I then discussed with them establishing this as a hospital. And I kept this in mind when I went back to Dachau and started to move the patients from Dachau. At the same time, the Germans were leaving. Those Germans that could leave left. Others were being rounded up by the American forces as they came through. But nobody stopped to think about it as a hospital or anything. And wherever we found Jews that were sick, like in Landsberg and elsewhere, we had no attention. The camps had no hospitals in them at the time. We started to move the first ones down from Landsberg to the place here. And there were a lot of Lithuanian Jews in Landsberg, you see, and these were Lithuanian Jews too, and they began to cling to each other. So we had the ones coming in from Landsberg down there, and later on I brought up the big load from Dachau. In the meantime, I would spend, every time I would pass from Landsberg to Munich, I would stop at St. Etienne, and I would provide truckloads of materials that I took out of the warehouses of Dachau. Dachau had tremendous storehouses. And then whatever extra foods we could find around, bring there. And I started the practice of coming, if I were in the area, on Friday evening for Shabbos. And we would meet in a little room, a tiny room. There was Zalman Grinberg, and he had then his brother-in-law, a fellow named Rapega. Another doctor. Myself, maybe one or two others around the table, and with just some meager food, a little piece of fish and so forth. And this would be our Sabbath, and sometimes I would stay over there. I'd sleep there. I'd go on my way the following morning. And then step by step, we started to build up. We had, originally the big cathedral was used for the Wehrmacht hospital. We didn't touch that. We stayed away from the cathedral part. And we stayed only in the other buildings, which may have been the residential buildings of the monks and so forth. And we started to provide for those buildings, and little by little we began to fill it up with the intention of making it a hospital. And then finding Jewish doctors that were available and bringing them in. And within a number of months after the incident in Dachau, we had a very large hospital going. So much so that on a Friday night, let's say 3 months later, we used the big hall, and the whole staff was there, which may have totaled maybe 100 people, and we had a big Sabbath meal. So that was the building up of St. Etienne. Then came the time when they came to me and told me they had to get out because somebody had gotten to the Catholic Church, and this was under the authority of Rome. And the Catholic chaplains had worked something out, and so we were now in a very difficult position because this was our main hospital for the whole area, and if we lost this, we lost everything as far as medical help and so forth. And so I went then to the medical officer in Dachau.
This is all June or?
That's the early period. Went to him and told him the story. And he said to me, "You don't worry about it. You're going to have that hospital, and as long as I'm here, that will not be turned over to the Vatican." And he fought the battle. He told me about it, and we kept it. It was kept all the way through. The more they fought, the more it was kept. The fact that we never took the sanctuary, of course, stood us in good stead because we weren't there to do anything other than to maintain a hospital.
Doesn't it seem strange that the American army would go against the wishes of the Vatican? What purpose?
Well, it didn't seem strange to me because everything was a kind of a tug of war at the time. I can understand the...
Well, if it belonged to a German...
Yes, but this was a sacred place. After all, it's the church. And after all, you have the Catholic chaplains of high rank, and I'm sure some of the Catholic leaders there got in touch with them and said, we'd like to get our properties back, and they're St. Etienne, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have it back, except that there happened to be a hospital in there, and they happen to be DPs. Well, like everybody else, you move them.
Right.
Where are you going to move them to? And just as I stopped the movement elsewhere, I stopped the movement here. Had I not had this relationship with the medical officer in Dachau, I don't know what would have happened, except that if the time would come to move them, and I would have gone up there, and we just held our ground. That's about what would have happened. That's St. Etienne. Now, on a road going from Landsberg to Feldafing, there was a hospital called Gauting, and Gauting was a TB center. We had a lot of TB cases.
It had always been a TB.
Yes. And there, too, after the war, some people had been picked up and they'd been taken in there, not as TBs and so forth. And when I came there, I met a few of the people that I stopped by and I walked in.
Again, June?
A couple of Jews. Had
Yeah,
been
no,
picked
but this was also during June.
Same time, a little bit later. Gouting came after St. Stephen. And so I decided that we needed a TB hospital, and Gouting was going to be the hospital, and there were people there that were willing to help establish it. Then I went back to Grinberg and asked Grinberg to come down to Gouting and see what we can do. And he was willing to help in terms of getting doctors and so forth. And then when I went back to the medical officer in Dachau and I said to him, I have a TB center for you. This was a tremendous thing for him because he just couldn't take TB cases and deliver them anywhere. And he offered not only to give me the patients, but also all the film I would need. We needed film, an X-ray film at the time, and only Army had it. Where else were you going to get it? And so we set a manager in the hospital, and we started to move out the other patients. And little by little, we moved in all our TB patients into Gouting. It was a nice hospital. I tried for other institutions too, but I'd never carried it out because either I didn't go far enough or something else happened. So that established our second hospital. The hospital in Munich, this was a direct need for a hospital. We had no hospital, and now many Jews were in Munich. And there was a hospital called Bogenhausen.
This was later then?
This came later.
Do you remember?
No, but again, I can tell you the doctor and everybody involved in this. And there was a doctor in charge of the medical structure for Munich, a fellow by the name of Linnick, Marvin Linnick. I see him quite often now. And I went to Marvin, he was a captain then, and I told Marvin I wanted the Bogenhausen Hospital. It was being run by some sisters of something and so forth. And, of course, he turned me down. But then I persisted, and I used all kinds of means, which I don't think I want to relate now because, I mean, he's alive, and I don't want this to embarrass anybody. And eventually got him to...
You had to fight.
Yeah, eventually to let us move in and move the other patients out. See, that always trick was move in and move somebody out. And then to bring our doctors in. And the doctor that, very interesting fellow, he's a very popular doctor here in New York now, very successful. He became the head of the hospital. Mm-hmm. I have to think of the name. He's got one bad leg. But I'll think of it, just go over these names. And so that established our third hospital. In the meantime, by this time, we were already establishing clinics in the camps. We had one in Feldafing, one in Landsberg, and so on. Now, these are the three hospitals I established. And they remained there throughout the time that, situation.
Do you have any idea when they closed?
No, I couldn't. They were all there when I left.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to them after I left is...
Well, that's pretty late.
Yeah. Well, I left Munich in 47. I left Kassel in 48.
And they were still going?
Oh, yeah.
Anything else about the hospitals that you helped set up?
Well, I told you a story about Gouting and the German doctors who were... We had a request to have them imprisoned because they were Nazis and they were going to have to be tried, so forth. And I had to intercede on their behalf so that they could remain in the hospital because we had no Jewish doctors to replace them. And they remained until such time as we were able to staff the hospital with Jews, and then they left. What happened to them, of course, wasn't my concern.
Now, you mentioned that you had set up an underground, your own underground.
That's right.
Could we be...
Yes, it's very simple. Undergrounds really are not underground, everything's above ground. One of the things that concerned me at the time was the tendency of people to go back to Eastern Europe, and I didn't want them to go back.
They were going back either to live or to look for relatives?
Look for people. Relatives. Those that wanted to go back to live, we had nothing to do with. There were Jews that were repatriated. Yeah. In fact, I remember a big battle in one of the camps where the repatriated Jews, the leftists, were fighting with the others and, ridiculing them. And these were the great Marxists. And
where are they today?
A lot of them came back. You see, after they got to Russia and discovered what was going to happen to them. It never dawned upon them. It never would have dawned upon me either that if you go back, you're by the very nature that you were with the Germans, you become a man of treason. Well, anyway, the people felt compelled to go back, though, first of all, to find family, and especially if rumors came from, and we couldn't stop them. So I felt that if we couldn't stop them, then help them. And so wherever people were going back, and I was made aware of it, I would start issuing papers and so forth and so on to ease their way. However, in certain cases where we got specific information that somebody was there, and in most cases children, because if they were adults, they could come out, but in case of children, they couldn't. Secondly, the Russians had already been collecting the children and kept them in Russian-controlled homes or orphanages, and they wouldn't let the children go. They wanted the parents to come back, and then they would arrest the parents. And so we would then set up programs for bringing the children out.
Now, when was this? This was, again, in June, July?
Well, again, it's very easy to pin down. It would have to be a little later than that, but it'd have to be in the summer because, you know, I could tell you some of the children in Israel. You can go and interview them.
Okay.
They can tell you exactly when they came out, and they can give you the story of it. We would send people for them. And this was a rather complicated bit. And like every underground, you don't control the parts. You just kind of, you initiate the action, but you don't control the parts, but you try to provide for every eventuality. Some eventualities were very sad. Some of our people were caught, were sentenced by the Russians for many years. Very sad. We have a mother, child, and she's no longer a child in Israel. She's a teacher in Ashkelon, or in Ashdod, rather. She was a little girl then. She was one of the girls that we went for. Her mother was part of the group that went, caught, sentenced to prison for many years, and separated from her child. Others we were successful with, and we got the children.
Mm-hmm. Can we be more specific in terms of how many, do you have any idea how many children you rescued in this way?
Well,
how was it set up?
How was it set up? It was simply that you got a person, and you provided the person with money.
Mm-hmm. Money and papers.
And papers and so forth. I'll tell you one story, which I think is a highly dramatic story, and it'll give you an idea. There was this woman. She came to me and said that she can't live with the man she's living with anymore because they are separated by the fact that he knows or feels that his children are somewhere in Eastern Europe. And she's got to go and look for them. So I said, fine, I knew them. He was active in my work there. He died only recently.
The name?
Sekelson, Misha. So I said to her, Genya was her name. Fine, Genya, okay, let's get to work. And so we now started. Papers, money, everything that you need, jewelry, so forth. However, these are the instructions. You cannot go for one child. We have word that this child is available, this child, and so forth. Now you must... And so now we get her to go. She goes. And then, of course, things begin to develop, which she did not anticipate. She got to one point on her trip, and she felt that she shouldn't go any further. And so there she hired someone else to go. Now, there were people moving up in the back, black marketeers and other guys, so that you could buy favors from. And he didn't produce. And so she decided to go all the way herself, which she did. Unfortunately, a day or two before she arrived at this particular place, the children broke out of the building they were in and fled in all directions. So now she had to start looking for them. In the meantime, during the trip, she called upon a Christian family that had housed one of the children to try to trace the child. By this time, she was out of money, except that she had one diamond ring. I gave her the diamond ring. I got the diamond ring in a strange way. A man was imprisoned in Munich, black market. And this woman, or his wife, whether his wife or not, I don't know, but came to me and asked me to get him out of jail. Normally, I could get everybody out, except this fellow was way deep in the black market. But the judge was willing to let him out, but he wanted bail. And he wanted 300,000 Reichsmark, something like that, or 30,000, I don't remember. It wasn't a lot of money. It sounds like a lot of money, but it's 300 to $1 at that time, I think. And at that particular moment, I didn't feel that I wanted to deposit that much money with the court, because I knew once he's out, we lose the money. He's not going to appear. And I wouldn't expect him to appear, except that I couldn't maneuver at that moment with this kind of money. But I felt that if the case came up, that I'd get him out. But this woman was fearful, you know. It's the Nazis all over again. He's going to be imprisoned and all this, and kept at me. So in order to kind of appease her for the moment at least, I said, well, all right, I says, if you could raise part of the money, I'll get the rest and we'll do it. So she took the ring off of her finger. Now, I was in a spot. If I give her back the ring, I have to go and get him out. Yet I don't want the ring. But I kept it. I got the money anyway. I got him out. Still cost that same amount of money. And he disappeared. And there I was with the ring. And so when the time came for Jenny to go, I wanted to get rid of the ring. So I said, Jenny, here, take this also. You never know, you may have to use it. And that ring then became the last item in purchasing someone that would help round up or find the children. And it worked. She got the children. She got 3 of them. However, she was only able to bring 1 back directly. And the other 2 we got later. And they were returned to their parents and so forth. Now, just to give you the full drama of this story, I've kept in contact with these people, some of them, especially the little girl, because when she came, I had some friends go to Saks Fifth Avenue, buy a lot of clothes, gave it to her. She wouldn't wear them, though. She always looked at them, but wouldn't wear them. And her mother, not to my knowledge, was very disturbed by the fact that she had to give up that ring. And so, as the story comes out later, I mean, I didn't know it at that time, she had resolved in her own mind that she was going to find that ring. And she found it. She found the man, traced the ring, and bought it back a long time afterwards. And the next thing that she was going to do is give me the ring. Except that one day when she took the ring out, she was waiting for the opportunity. I've traveled up and back to Israel and so on. The stone was gone. And now, her problem was to get a new stone to put in the ring. And this again, time went on. And when I was married second time, and I took my wife to Israel, and we had dinner. It was at the Hilton, I remember. Chotter Yishai and his wife, Jenny and Misha, my wife. And as we came out of the hotel, she said to my wife, I've never known what to do with this little package. She put it in her hand. And that's where the ring is. It's a wonderful story. So anyway, the purpose of this story is merely to indicate, what an underground may be like. One of the kids was the Kaplan boy. Kaplan was our literary figure. He was the man that established what we call the Historische Kommissie. We published a journal, and this again was another one of my projects to get it going and so forth, the paper and all that. And we have a number of issues of it. He's in Israel, Kaplan. His son was part of it, but she couldn't bring him back, and so she then made a deal with someone else. And I kept the deal. In other words, I paid $1,200, I believe. I still have the canceled check. And he was brought into Munich. No, into Berlin. There was a little trouble there then because of the Russians. And one of my friends from the Faber Castle was going up to Berlin. He was once one of the editors of The Nation. I'll think of his name in a moment. I spoke to him and I told him...
Willard?
No. I'll tell you in a moment. I told him what I wanted, and he went up to Berlin and he put the kid in the trunk of the car and brought him in. And this was Hanukkah of 45 or 46. I know it was Hanukkah because I didn't know where Kaplan lived. Somebody gave me an idea in someplace in Munich where. And so when the kid was brought in that day, it was Hanukkah, and I went through the street shouting for Kaplan. See, I made a promise to Kaplan that I would get his child if he would stay and write, because he said he was going to go, but he was such a schlemazel, he never would have come back. And I remember his sticking his head out of the window, and I told him I had a Hanukkah gift for him, this boy. So that's something of the nature of that kind of work.
If people come to you and say, I want to go to
Yes.
Eastern Europe, and
That's right.
can you provide the...
Yes, I give it different people. Can I provide this? Can I provide that? One fellow came. I dressed him up as a soldier in a uniform. I gave him one
Did
of my
you have
uniforms.
contacts in the Eastern...
None at all. Had no contacts. Once they left me, they were on their own. They had to establish their own contacts.
Do you have any idea how many people were rescued that way?
No, who came back, who didn't, and...
They didn't report to you afterwards what their
No,
success or-
sometimes you were gone, they were gone, they moved through, they may have taken another road, they may have gone south directly to Italy or to Marseille, or stayed up north. It was not a time where you sat down
right.
and start to think and reflect upon what you're doing. There are people who have a kind of an awareness of history, and they keep diaries or notes or things of this sort, and they are always looking into the mirror of history. But I merely proceeded from day to day and did what I thought I wanted or should be done, and this is the way it worked out. When it was all done, I left. The first time I was requested to leave. I didn't leave on my own. Second time I left on my own. So that's about it.
What about the food situation? We just touched on it before. How did you deal with that?
The food situation presented problems in different periods. At the beginning, in Dachau, of course, the army was there and they were fed. In the other camps, the officers had to get the food from the economy, the German economy. And a fellow like Smith, of course, was very effective, and he got it. Other places had problems because the kind of officers that were dropped off, we had one place where an officer was dropped off, the people were fed very poorly, and when I went to talk to him, he said, I can't get food. In the meantime, he was wasting his time with some German women, which was illegal at the time, and some horses he had picked up, and he was kind of...
Remember who this was and where this was?
No, I know where it was. It was... pick up the map, I can tell you. It was just on the other side of the Starnberg See. This was, the Jews there were housed in an old ammunition factory. You see, when I got Fehrenwald, it was just below Fehrenwald. Fehrenwald was the place where the people lived who worked in this place. However, after the war, the Jews were in this place where the work took place, and the Volksdeutsch were still living in the little village, nice little village, and that's what got me on to getting that village for him and turning the picture around. Not that I wanted the others to go; they didn't go there, but I wanted them out of that Buchberg. Yeah, Buchberg is the name of it. I think it was Buchberg. Your names are. Well, anyway, when I spoke to him, of course, he told me he couldn't get the food. And I got angry with him, and I kind of threatened him, the fact that he had these women, horses, and so forth. And so he began to do something about it. But this was one of the problems. Now, the next problem was how to handle the food. And there was an interesting little chapter here. See, the Germans, in their various installations, had pots in which they cooked food. Now, these pots were huge pots. And under the pot, there was a gas burner. And you threw all the food into the big pot and so forth. And I thought it would be a good idea to do everything in terms of stews and soups, because this would enable us to throw everything in terms of calories and so forth, the fat and the sugar, and then to make certain that people had enough of it. Except that I found that after I'd gotten this system going, that the people were complaining. I remember in Feldafink where the people were just following me around complaining how terrible the soup was. So I went into the kitchen, literally, and I took a ladle, and I took some of the stew out, and I ate it. And it happened to be good, at least to my taste. But they were unanimously agreed that it was terrible. Of course, when you're thrown into situations of this sort, you're constantly learning things. And I just did nothing about it at that point, until I came to this other camp, to Buchberg. And a strange thing happened there. That's where I met Jothelson for the first time. And I walked through the camp. And I got the list of names then for the Sherita Plato, so it was quite early. And as I passed one little shack, there was a girl sitting there, young lady. And I stared at her. And I didn't realize why I was staring. And I kept walking. And I kept thinking about her. And then suddenly it dawned upon me that she was wearing lipstick. And I hadn't seen a woman with lipstick. Not only hadn't I seen a woman with lipstick, I haven't seen women that looked like women in the sense of being put together well. And then the question came to me, where did she get the lipstick? And then immediately I began to think of brasiers. Where do you get a brassiere? Where do you get underwear? Nobody's giving out any underwear, brasiers, or lipstick. The Army certainly isn't giving it out. Nobody else is around. The only schmatters that they had in the concentration camp. And here they're beginning to, wear a dress here and so forth. Then I understood the food situation. See, when we took all the food and dumped it into the pot, then we had destroyed its exchange value, you see. Now, a woman would have preferred taking her little bit of sugar or fat and going into the marketplace and exchanging it for a tube of lipstick or a brassiere or a dress or something, and the Germans wanted this, and so forth. This began the beginning of the market, you see. So the objection was not to the taste of the food, and from that moment on, there were no soups anymore. It was discontinued immediately. I mean, I just called off the whole approach. Well, here you have, then of course, once the market is established, the black market, then depending upon the ingenuity of people, where people earned a lot of money, they were able to buy things. Some of these markets were tremendous.
Maybe that would lead into the black market situation. Could we be more specific about that?
Well, this was the beginning of it. And as people built up, there were money changers, would exchange money with GIs, sell soap, sell cigarettes. Cigarettes became the main exchange item. It had a value.
Worth $1 a cigarette, I was told.
No.
Not at that time?
No, I don't. It wasn't worth $1 a cigarette. The value of cigarettes was more stable in Germany than gold is today. In other words, it had a regular value, and we knew what it cost and so forth and how it got there. It wasn't. People are under the impression that the cigarette market was established by GIs. They throw cigarettes around and so forth, or go to the PX, and that's a lot of nonsense. You wouldn't have enough cigarettes to establish a market, though. Cigarettes were brought in by the trainload. Now, we had people in Munich that were purchasing cigarettes from the United States. DPs were purchasing cigarettes from the United States.
With what?
Ah, well, that's very interesting. This is a story in itself. With what? It starts on one level and begins to work up. In other words, an entrepreneur starts his little business, and he now may have started with a bar of soap or something else or some clothes, and he now has a few Reichsmarks, which he now buys some currency, that is military currency, or he may sell something to a GI for military currency. He may then get a GI to take the military currency and to get him a money order, to send home or to give to him. He collects these. And then he goes north, comes to Belgium. He runs into an importer, makes a deal with him. The importer buys a shipment of cigarettes, and they're sent in. Then he has to begin to pay off. Now you're, of course, on the big level. You build up each person. Then they pay off for the transport from there into... Ja, die nemen bij je tanden, ze zullen get je wel, ja. Ook je ziet op jou, maar dus maar dat, nee, niks en zes en zo. Ja, dat is niet. Maar dat is ja, nee, jullie, nee. Die bestoon je, maar wat, een zelfkeer misses je. Ja, op zit net, ook die ones, ja, maar het is niet heel zeker. Nee, kijk maar, je nog dus niet op zit, en je nog veel wat everyone, that's a capital joke, you know, constant, no matter Norway, the business is bad, but okay, those never work. Still, I was needing you, but had mistakes, didn't need to stand Missouri, and she hasn't all get Missouri. Still, the mountain took the syrup when she run to the line, you never college, so I was shot. Oh, well, the shop took some. No, we don't win so. Yes, you know. Ja, hierover met je op, met hierop, waarom? Nou, ja, dat zie je, net een boel met de worm, ja, gewoon, dat is ook niet, dat niet eens, dat je gaat. Nee. En je ziet, je schijt, dat ben je dat niet aan. Oh ja, zo veel moeilijk is niet. Ja, dat niet nooit, maar zo veel is, je bent hier, zo is, nee, oh ja, nee, wat. Ja, dat is het, twee is dat. Ik heb het ooit niet zo moe snap. Ik heb het eigenlijk nog staan. Ik heb het dus nooit niet zo. Ik neem het bij.
We hear that niet wat het functies en zo niet het niet zo ja nou ook het eigenlijk niet het nou ook het eigenlijk in de shots ja het was doing now. Maar nou het is nog wat nog nog
Het is net als niet, dat zie je de file. Say? Well, it certainly said my head. You thought we had, what? Super bowl. I get money from the pot. I knew my have to do on the floor. I got it. I'd make it under that skin of the mouth, rope and front of when I'd been up from the old man, still been out to be enough, but walk in touch, and there some solutions that just never seem to happen. There's your guy in slow and so, but you throw, but I went, well, if you've seen certainly this that I've ever been, certainly you're off, and certainly you'll stay with us. So you'll throw with sling, as me, I said, didn't me, he'll shit off, and then he's the Irish, yeah, that's upset, it's up. Ja, jongens, yes, er maakt zelf ook uit. Maar wat je gaat, en dat is snel er bien. Zo men er bien dat wil zien. Hoe zie je was niet en net ja ook. Er weet dan moet je zijn, dat is maar wel. Ja, nou eens niet. Er bien de bien niet meer. Zo en dan net. Je het nu hier en zo niet te brengen zo wel al niet even tijd. Wat?
Maar dat is niet nou weer de
oplossing met al die ouder. Je is een schade van je. En het is minder wat je deed, die heeft ook staat heel gezegd met dat was. Die heeft ook eens nurse nog niet. Dus de zich heel goed niet kwaast. Dus dat in en het hebt. Dus het wel was een shield, het is nu hier in de spam en de silver for the massage. No, already. Nou, alles dat al verschillend is op zich. Ja, we know, first, we're prevented you never, we're going to on, or you're no, you know, what's it? Hey, you read up to you, yeah, so I hang it here and see, yeah, you're in the city. Yes, see, over so over but I one. So there's a kind of a far on it. Yeah, the radio sitting over there, you got you read it like you got. No, that's a lot. I looked not once, now I'm walking in the lips in the touch on it. Maar vaak je wel wat gebeurt, die wat is dus is zie fout je het, ze die dan weer was. Nou weet nou waar we en thing that surrounding the outside rocket that out so we fire with back and so we're at the mess of it now we know where we're so much out and insistent when I can make it in with what's much that who hard news yeah so we are work hard minute there time that's it and that is yes how you was and so where people what did you know سبرش قد نحن سوالي ما سوال اسمان سوي رجني هيك الله قد بهنا سياب سنم في لو روح نيوخ ميتوخ يا سوي in the that's what man goes nowhere. See, it's your remember it's and since for breath will then that mean you the mark as well. So when the symbol time that they did but the ball and the can't of the religion smack it with but you're right in the problem that was when again but you're right mess will turn now you see the no winner there will be you and you will make it smack it with the opportunity with obviously you were she and having it in it so wasn't the hand in the lap you were right over what you won
no it's just we say already
there's Monday you get it in and you'd all give the سنية طبعا إنه يتكلم يدعوك بدك نشان على ضيبر سنية طبعا يبقى الشوق من فيه مثل قبل ويجي سوفي من بعض بيدي ما سوف بشوق يب خلاص فهذا كان يرجعونا وقفوا سنشي هذا الأمر ذو سنتين وسلم وسنتين يوم يخاف ما يحزد الفرق نسيس نسوم غلطان الفرق ثلاث سيسي لكن يتعرف الناس بالفرق يتسنوحي سيسي واس وفي مجراح عوت توقف تجيزن فاحولي هتسنن وداعي ما يسمى تسنن هواس كيت هواس ست طلع الرواز وسيت توقف بتفاين هذا من رأى عوز ندو يا هواس وبوش نسيابس نربش وفوراح نسنوي نسنوش لفضل بشهد نسلوك بشرف من العظم بس يتطور ووش بس من أيما يا عبار نوك هذا سيسوش نسنوك واو سنسلوك تجي دابر سياف ووش نكيكاد you keep me out as well, you know, yeah, you know, looking over the outside. We throughout it. You know, see, our Klausner. Yeah, no. Oh, he didn't know whether. Yeah, but I you folks said this name also get the might work from the boss and the director from the slack on and called who beat them, Ja, så finns det säsongen att man kan visa såna. Jag vet inte. In besök så det där är det var så här som där ju så ser nog det ger det nog. I det nog. Ja, det är strax det där inte med det. Det kostar mig en vakt när besök men det så det blir en så vad så då när jag är för för ju inte bäst i vouchen nej då ni då ska det ha det nu. Men jag kan inte prata om shit för att jag inte har något så det mest men jag ser det bara inte no.
det är ju det med det ska vara det
där där med jag vet inte det men jag är ju det är mig jag tror det är det så vad som är så ni längre bira ska det bli så ska jag ni så ni så när jag fall så då jag blir nästa så in den ja no really I wasn't so hard to buy if Schneider or the labor so keen so then I was that I got nothing shelf was the labor so keen was the strong out in being talked to yeah we know yeah that's a yes we thought the bit so then it must have said the part yeah no you're all sack and must have said we're food isn't it slur immersion is even that well hard but that's stay at my no Michelle just a sort of know what I had got to say about it you live in the yeah and it must have immersion in flock and yeah the beach immersion is book it half you know you back what yeah it's yeah you know you talk to you not yeah was well you know like you was you see immersion with got zero yeah but you being the job zero hope and you get who's obvious in the night it was immersion with command was so yes yeah but no it's about when there's immersion immersion the way you did in there so I was doing see with 5 years is that I was no you know what I'm saying you know that's what you know the first is always good they agree واحد they agree no there's no way isn't it she was just that baby was it say the last thing you might talk certainly it's the oh you always say yeah when I said hemor sit was så så för in där där den jag ska det så jag måste se him där snäll vart kan jag gå in och ha det chat fuck no man jag vill inte prata för det var ju mer så där ja nej så blir det också gjort ska bara för det är så det och ha mycket så jag nu har mycket vi
det var säkert rätt innan det blev man och vi nog hade bara versus har vi nämnt det det nu det här björ det emergency food if needs whether it björ så då det är det men att man ser här det var så vi när så vi ett marsch lite med vissa skinn på ett med själv kom så så var det marsch med vissa när det var bäst att man hade fast jag har snart av för så när det var så men det är mer kan
was Sukkot in 1945.